What happens when two women show up to a wedding in a wedding dress? I've seen it, and it's not pretty. Years ago, a good friend of mine from university was getting married. They had been together 6 years in total. She had attended all sorts of family functions, and always came back with a peculiar story about how she believed her mother-in-law, Darlene, secretly despised her. A few friends and I were invited to the wedding. My friend had a large family, so this was not going to be a small affair. Neither of them were particularly religious, but my friend expressed that it would be nice to be married under a huppah. It's a traditional Jewish thing, featuring 4 poles covered with a white cloth and lots of flowers. Her husband was supportive, and encouraged her to rent one for the wedding. The bridal shower was in full swing when Darlene discovered that the lovely canopy was, in fact, a huppah. She nearly lost her composure in front of everyone, but managed to pull herself together and laugh angrily, stating that if the Jews were being represented, so should the Catholics. In my head, I heard a record screech. Get this, they aren't Catholic. Not even a bit. Not even in the sense of, I grew up Catholic but I don't go to church anymore. Even their grandparents weren't Catholic. After a lot of fighting, screaming, crying, and threatening to withdraw non-existent monetary contributions, Darlene finally lost the battle. The boot was firmly placed, and nothing was going to move it. Things then went suspiciously quiet. The night before the wedding, my friend texted me saying she had a bad feeling. I reassured her that it was probably just anxiety since it was a big occasion. I wish I knew how wrong I was. On the big day, we all showed up, got our hair and makeup done, slipped into our bridesmaid dresses, and waited for the bride to finish with her hair. She commented that she hadn't seen Darlene all day and that she skipped her hair and makeup appointment. We all exchanged worried glances, sipped our wine, and hoped the eerie feeling would subside. But 30 minutes later, as we were helping the bride into her dress, guess who shows up? There was Darlene, flushed from coming up the stairs, in full hair and makeup. And a white wedding dress. The dress was clearly bridal attire, even from David's bridal. It was snow white, floor-length satin with a sweetheart beaded top, a bit of a train, and off-white lace on the bottom. It was even tailored to fit her. This had clearly been a long con she had orchestrated. For anyone who knows, a wedding dress takes months to make and prepare. The bride burst into tears. All the aunts and friends swiftly ushered Darlene out. We did our best to console the bride, touched up her makeup, and I promised her that the dress would never be seen in a photo. She looked me dead in the eye and nodded. The game was on. The venue only supplied white wine and champagne for the wedding party, but I managed to run down to the reception area, flag down an attendant by the bar, and bribe him with $20 to give me a bottle of red wine early. I opened the bottle, filled a solo cup to the brim with it, and stalked outside. After a few courage-boosting swigs from the bottle, I went over to where everyone was getting ready to take photos. With one last hard stare at my friend, I received her nod of approval. I held my phone in front of my face, as if reading a text, and walked straight into Darlene. I poured the entire cup of red wine down the front of her dress, jumped back, and gasped. The look on her face was priceless. She screamed, yelled, threatened, and promised she would sue me. People had to restrain her because she wanted to fight me. Eventually, she transitioned from screaming to sobbing, sank to the ground, and threw a tantrum on the floor. Everyone retreated and let her have it before walking away to go take photos. It was surreal, as if everyone just hit their limit and walked away from her. The 12-year-old flower girl was the last one left. She pulled out her phone and snapped a few photos. Darlene went home sobbing, and didn't return until the end of the wedding, now in a somewhat normal dark green dress, which had a high slit up to her thighs. She missed photos, the vows, and her speech. The wedding was beautiful without her. The bride received the picture from the flower girl, printed it, and framed it.
Have you ever gone to war with a family member? Who won? The moment I met him, it was clear that my stepdad hated me, but I had no idea how far he would go to hurt me. His only mistake was that he raised my stepbrother to have a conscience. My dad passed away when I was 15. My mom and him weren't particularly close at the time, so while his death hit me hard, she wasn't as fazed as one might expect. I joined the military when I was 17, and during my first year out of the house, my mom remarried. I never really connected with my stepdad. We had polar opposite personalities. He often made snide remarks, telling me to man up whenever I was upset about any inconvenience. This led to many arguments between us, but I never would have imagined how far he would take it. 5 years after my mom and stepdad offered to let me move in, I was medically discharged from the military. I told them it would be temporary, just until I got on my feet and found a job, and even offered to pay rent, which they declined. However, about 3 days into my stay, my stepdad, when alone with me, asked what he thought fair rent would be. I was confused, but it was his house, so we came to an agreement. I kept this from my mom, assuming he did not want her to know, as he never mentioned it around her. He had a son from a previous marriage. Like his father, I didn't share many interests with him either, but we got along fine, and he was a good guy. They paid for his schooling, his car, and his living arrangements through college and beyond. I didn't need the help, but it felt unfair that he received all this assistance, and I was immediately asked for rent. I moved out after 3 months, and not long after, I met a girl with whom I fell deeply in love. We began dating and this was my first relationship. I was overjoyed the entire time, as if caught in a constant early relationship haze. Introducing her to my family made me nervous. My mom and I were very close, and I feared she might judge my girlfriend harshly. These fears proved to be unwarranted. They got along incredibly well. My girlfriend, who didn't really have a family, was warmly welcomed by my mom and stepdad. They became like her second parents. This bond seemed to bring my stepdad and I closer, something I hadn't realized I wanted. About a year into our relationship, I knew she was the woman I wanted to marry. I shared this with my mom and stepdad, and they both seemed thrilled. She was practically part of the family already. My mom gave me her engagement ring, the one my dad had given her, which she had kept. When I proposed, my girlfriend told me that she loved the ring and didn't consider it just a placeholder. It was the happiest moment of my life. As we started planning the wedding, my mom and stepdad offered to help with the finances. This was the first time they had ever offered to help me financially, and it meant a lot to me. Fast forward to about 3 months later. I received a call from my stepdad asking me to come over. I complied, and when I arrived, I found my mom, stepdad, stepbrother, and fiancé there. My fiancé looked as if she had been crying. I thought someone had died and I moved to sit next to her, but my stepdad stopped me. He began accusing me of cheating on her throughout our relationship. I was puzzled and protested my innocence. Apparently, a woman had contacted my fiancé claiming that we had been sleeping together for over a year. This woman claimed to have evidence of our alleged conversations and knew personal details about me that a stranger wouldn't. I begged my fiancé to check my phone and verify that I hadn't done anything wrong. Both she and my mother were crying, and I started crying too. My stepdad called me every name he could think of and told me to leave, threatening to call the police if he ever saw me on his property again. Over the next few weeks, I tried to contact them but to no avail. After that time, my stepdad called me, telling me to stop trying to contact my ex-fiancé and warned me never to come near his family again. Despite repeated attempts, I was unable to reach my mother either. A month later, all I received from her was a heartbreaking text expressing her disappointment. My stepdad's family, with whom we used to spend holidays, shunned me as well. Seeing their Christmas pictures on Facebook, with my ex-fiancé present and seemingly in good spirits, crushed me. The only family who would talk to me at all were my dad's brother and his family. However, even they seemed wary of me. My uncle was the only one who truly believed in my innocence. His support kept me going. He provided me with the fatherly love I had been missing, and for that, I have never been more grateful. About 6 months later, I moved from the East Coast to California, feeling the need to escape it all. Almost a year after my move, I received a call from my stepbrother. I hung up on him at first, but when he called again, I decided to answer. The conversation was awkward to say the least. Then he told me something that seemed to break and fix everything all at once. He told me that my stepdad had manipulated the situation, hired a woman to claim that she and I had an affair, and forged messages to send to my fiancé. He admitted that he had known this for a month and couldn't keep it to himself anymore. He planned to tell my mom and my ex-fiancé the next day and called me first to decide what to tell them about me. I asked him not to let them contact me immediately, so I had some time to digest everything. After my stepbrother's revelation, a wave of emotion swept over me. There was confusion, relief, but most of all, anger. I finally had the truth. Something I could use to restore my tarnished reputation, and to expose my lying stepfather. With my uncle's guidance, we decided to reveal my stepdad's despicable scheme. He connected me to a highly reputable lawyer friend of his, who was stunned by my story and agreed to represent me without any fees. We filed a defamation lawsuit against my stepdad and began gathering every piece of evidence we could. Meanwhile, my stepbrother confessed everything to my mom and my ex-fiancé. The aftermath was explosive. My mother, feeling betrayed, promptly filed for divorce. She made it her mission to expose my stepfather's true colors. He was ostracized from our community, left to bear the weight of his horrendous actions alone. Both my mother and my ex-fiancé reached out to me, filled with remorse and guilt. They begged for my forgiveness and asked for a chance to fix our relationship. It took some time, needing to heal from the wounds, but eventually, we started rebuilding our connections, stronger and more understanding than before. My ex-fiancé and I decided to take a step back and start fresh, this time at a slower pace. Despite everything that had transpired, our love for each other had not wavered, and we were eager to heal and move forward together. What was the best decision you made in your marriage? I slept with my wife's sister. I still have no regrets. My wife and I were childhood sweethearts, we did everything together. She was the love of my life. I proposed to her when I was 20. I knew it was the right time, so did she. When I was 26 and she was 25, we had our daughter. We were so happy. She was the one thing our life was missing. We were such a happy family. A few months after the birth of our first child, she gave birth to our son. Again, we were so happy, now we had our little family of 4. After college, I immediately got a job working for my father's company. My dad's company was big, I was able to make a lot of money, and my wife was even willing to sign a prenup. We went on dates very often, and our bedroom life was amazing. I showered her and our kids with gifts and flowers 3 times a week. We had a huge house. I was able to give her the life we dreamt about as teenagers. I thought we were happy, until I found out she had been cheating on me. I found a hookup app on her phone, and scrolled through an ungodly amount of messages she'd had with other men. When I confronted her about it, she didn't deny it. She said I was always absent, and she didn't have a way to be fulfilled. I wanted to leave, but didn't, for my kids. I hated the thought of them growing up in separate households. So, we went to counseling and were actually doing pretty well for a while. One day, maybe 2 months after starting therapy, she admitted that she had been hooking up with other guys every other night. She said she'd brought a few home, and even had them in our bed. My kids were now at this point 7 and 8 years old. We knew divorce would be hard on them since they loved us both so much, and I didn't want them to have a tainted image of her. Through my grief and pain, I stayed, but I moved my wife into the guest bedroom. Throughout all of this, there was one person keeping me sane. My wife's sister, Jane. My family didn't understand my pain. Jane did. My wife was always her parents' favorite, and Jane was thought of as a mistake baby. Until then, I had no clue she made Jane's childhood a living hell. At this point in time, my wife was barely home when she moved into the guest bedroom. Now our kids never saw their mom. Whenever they tried interacting with her, she was either cold, rude, or straight up ignored them. When she came home, she would get something to eat, drink, and go to her room and stay there. During these times, Jane was always there for my kids. She was at the house a lot. She picked up my kids and took them out for fun. She was usually home when my wife was home, but didn't care. After 2 years, they considered her their real mom, and called her as such. At first she was hesitant, but eventually took that title to heart. We spent a lot of time together, I loved it and so did she. Fast forward to a month ago. I had booked a trip to Fiji for the whole family, my wife included. Jane suggested it was time to stop ignoring the problem, and instead try and fix it. A nice vacation seemed to be the perfect opportunity. I tried fixing things for a year, but my wife didn't seem to care at all. When I went to my wife to suggest this, she screamed at me to F off, and that she wasn't going with you and those little brats. It sounded like she'd figured out that our kids had been calling Jane mom. She said they weren't hers anymore, and even said having them was a mistake. This really threw me off, but I didn't push it further. I told Jane what had happened, and since I had an extra ticket, asked her if she wanted to come instead. She was hesitant, but eventually accepted. It was the greatest trip any of us had been on. All of us had a blast, and we even met another super nice family there with kids around the same age. I know my kids love Jane very much, and it makes me really happy knowing they've had some kind of mother figure throughout the past 3 years of drama. This all led up to our last night in Fiji. That night, my kids were staying with the other family we'd met, which left Jane and I alone. We spent a long while just talking about the kids, and life in general. With the mood and atmosphere, we could both tell something was going on between us, so I kissed her. She stopped me at first, asking me if this was really what I wanted, and that it didn't seem right. I told her it was, and I told her how I felt. She was like the mother my kids hadn't had, and I really loved her for that. We ended up sleeping together that night. The next morning, not much was said about what had happened, but Jane seemed a lot happier. I texted my lawyer, and told him to get a divorce settlement written up. When I got home, I asked my wife if she'd had any guys over, and naturally, she had. This was really what convinced me that I was doing the right thing, and I handed her the settlement. What unfolded next wasn't pretty. She started screaming at me, cussing me out in front of my kids, and Jane. She said it wasn't her fault she cheated, but rather that I should have been around more often. To my surprise, Jane came to my defense straight away, instantly dismantling all of her accusations, and bringing my wife to tears. She stormed out of the house, grabbing what little belongings she had, and I didn't see her until the court date. Well, I got full custody of my kids, with little trouble. I was the breadwinner in the family, and my wife hadn't been able to hold a job for over 6 years. Unfortunately, since I technically was unfaithful to her in Fiji, she was entitled to some money, but wasn't much compared to what I was making from the company. In the end, she declined visitation rights, and said she really didn't care to see her kids ever again, and that was that. I haven't spoken to her since then, and as far as I know, Jane hasn't either. I do feel slightly guilty for going behind her back in Fiji, but compared to the years of infidelity from her, that was nothing. I am now living happily with my children and Jane, and we're happier than ever. My colleague turned FWB is mad because I kissed his friend. What now? I was in a friends with benefits situation with my colleague, A, who is 31, while I am 25. We agreed that our relationship would remain casual with no strings attached. As time went on, we had a conversation to discuss the direction our relationship was heading and to ensure we were on the same page. I expressed that I enjoyed being with him but had concerns about certain aspects of his behavior, as it reminded me of my ex. We both agreed that it was best to maintain our friendship and not complicate things further. The issue arose when A's friend, B, who is 36, started coming to visit him from a different region. Prior to his visits, B and I had become quite close. In May, we started chatting and laughing together frequently. When B came over in July, he kissed me while A was downstairs parking his car. I found myself enjoying the kiss. The next day, A questioned me about what had happened between B and me the previous night. Initially, I denied anything had occurred. However, as he continued to press, I found it difficult to keep the truth from him, so I admitted to kissing B. I wasn't angry about the kiss itself, since he had indirectly encouraged it to happen. His frustration stemmed from the fact that I hadn't told him immediately, as he believed it would have prevented our argument. I had chosen not to tell him because I didn't want to hurt him, but also because I didn't consider it a significant issue since we were only friends with benefits. However, he believed I should have been honest with him. Yet, I'm not even his girlfriend. Moreover, A is extremely indecisive. One moment, he acts like he only wants a physical relationship with me, and the next, he acts like he wants something more serious. Then, He orchestrates this situation between B and me as a test. I'm exhausted from his mind games, and I don't think he deserves an explanation. Some people may argue that it was unfair for me to kiss his friend while I was at A's house, but I fail to see the significance. Yes, I acknowledge that I should have told him at that point, but he reacts angrily even to the most trivial lies. Now, A and I aren't speaking to each other, and you know what? I don't care. Life goes on. I'm tired of begging people for forgiveness for things they themselves have contributed to. Why should I apologize for something they have played a part in? Frankly, his behavior is messed up.